Happy Friday, everybody. I'm Nick Slavik. I'm the proprietor of the Nick Slavik Painting and Restoration Company. I'm also the host of this show, Ask a Painter Live. It's a weekly live Facebook show where I use my over 2 decades of experience as a painter, as a restorationist, as an entrepreneur to answer any of your questions live. So today is a really fun show. It's my annual deck show. Everything you've ever wanted to know about decks. This is basically 10 to 20 years of experience restoring, finishing, prepping decks, all condensed down into this little thing. So Dustin, how's it going, buddy? Over in BC, he's been burning wood beams in a restaurant, I believe, this week. So we're gonna do a couple things here. I brought a whole bunch of stuff. We're gonna demonstrate a few things, but I wanted to basically give a quick, I get a bit long-winded on the internet here. We're gonna do a couple things here. We are going to I'm going to go give you like a 5-minute breakdown of, for homeowners, for pros. This is the basics. This is a 5-minute thing right at the top of the show, and then we're going to go into in-depth. Thank you to the PDCA, the Painting and Decorating Contractors of America, for underwriting this show, giving me content, sending me questions from all those people. The PDCA is one of the largest, actually is the largest collection of the best paint business entrepreneurs in the world. It's everything that's happened to my business in the last 2 or 3 years is mainly because of the perspective I gained from talking to the members of the PDCA. So thank you for that, and thank you for the suggestions for the shows. I understand you're doing estimates big at the PDCA, and I'm preparing a special show just for you for that, because it is something very near and dear to my heart. Okay, so basically, I have a whole bunch of cool stuff here. I got a whole bunch of chemicals, we got a whole bunch of equipment, all that good stuff. I'm gonna basically give you the quick lowdown on decks. So homeowners, pros, if you guys just wanna pop in for a couple minutes and pop out, if anybody wants more information, I'm gonna expound on this later in the show. But basically, the secret to all decks, if I think about every single deck I've ever done, this is basically what you do. For 95% of every deck out there, basically you will pressure wash it, scrub it if you need it, let it dry 2 days, sand it down, stain it with 1 coat of stain, let it dry for 24 hours, and then reuse it again. Now, there's a lot to that, obviously. One of the biggest concerns about decks is, what do we do with existing finish on there? What do we do if a deck is new? All that. So I'm going to go into in depth here with that. But basically, I get a whole bunch of questions, especially this time of the year, from homeowners and pros saying, what's a basic thing I can do to decks? What should I be doing to decks? And basically, it's just that. It's wash it off. I use a pressure washer. I have a whole bunch of different sizes of pressure washers. We have some large homeowner version ones. We have some industrial ones. We have this and that. And we sort of use them for different purposes. But basically, at its simplest form, you don't need any chemicals. You don't need any crazy equipment. If you can get a pressure washer or even a hose, a bucket, and a scrub brush, you can basically prep a deck. Even old grade decks, if you use a combination of, here's a quick mixture. There's a whole bunch of chemicals I'm going to go into today, but if you take a gallon of water, a cup of bleach, and 4 ounces of liquid TSP, mix that together, that is one of the best universal deck washes. It's not going to do everything perfect, but it's going to do a lot of things really, really well. So homeowners, if you just have a 5-gallon bucket and a scrub brush, something like this, you could do a lot worse than washing your deck by hand with that and then spraying it off with a garden hose. Giving it a quick sand, picking a stain. So again, 1,000 stains out there, a whole bunch of bases. We got waters, we got oils, we got hybrids. If you can use oil stain, just use oil stain. This is basically, there's 4 examples on this board here. Really, you only need these 3 here. The deck corrects, the elastomeric rubberized deck coatings. For a lot of reasons, especially in Minnesota, just don't use them. Use something else. There's a lot better alternatives. They're not the devil, but there are better alternatives. So basically what we have is we have a translucent stain, which 90% of my clients want. They want that cedar look. Most decks are cedar here. They want that cedar look. For decks that are a little older, or somebody that wants a definite color or something more in depth, this one happens to be a semi-solid, but a lot of companies call it semi-solid, semi-transparent, and then you have solid. And basically, if you can use an oil, use an oil. The only time I deviate from oils is a lot of times when we use solids. The manufacturers have seemingly not put a lot of R&D into the solid oils. There's a few that still do, but acrylics are really taking over. This one happens to be, this is actually a good example of the options for you there. This is a oil-based. This is a, this is an oil-based. This is a hybrid, which is a water and oil. And then this one is an acrylic. So if you can, if you go to a big box store or you go to a hardware store or a paint store and you don't specify, you say, we're gonna do our deck, we want the cedar look, most of the time clients will be handed a gallon or two of semi-transparent or translucent water-based stain. Again, not a bad product. I've not seen any of it work very well here in Minnesota. This is a horrible climate for decks. We go 100 degrees in the summer, we go -40 in the winter, there's snow, there's rain, there's all sorts of stuff. So again, there's probably a lot of dry, arid places in the country where that works well. In Minnesota, water-based translucent stains, I haven't seen have the quality of oil yet. So most people will end up doing something like this. Homeowners, once you wash your deck, give it a quick sand if it got furry. One coat of this, and working very quickly, 1 or 2 boards at a time, so you don't get weird lap marks and overlaps and things like that. And that's basically, you know, there's a lot to it. There's a lot of stuff that fills in the gaps, but that's basically what you have to do to a deck. People send me all sorts of elaborate sort of processes they use, a lot of homemade chemicals, a lot of hearsay, a lot of this and that, and they overcomplicate it. I rarely see people oversimplify the process. More likely than that, they're going to overcomplicate it. So over the next half an hour or so here, most likely 45 minutes because I'm kind of a windbag, I'm going to go through step by step, give you some science, give you some processes, some equipment, things like that, and then yeah, I'll answer any questions here. So thank you everybody for watching. I appreciate all the comments and things here. I will be answering questions kind of as we go here. Ivan and all the pintors from Brazil, boa tarde, and thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Dustin, excited for deck day. I don't do a lot of decks. Any tips on getting grease from a barbecue out of raw wood? Okay, before I jump into it, that's a tough one. Anytime you have a grease, inside on kitchen cabinets, outside on a deck like that, try a TSP. TSP at its molecular level will actually emulsify the grease and turn it into a soap. So if you've ever used TSP on a greasy cabinet door, made a solution of it, cleaned it off like that, you'll actually notice it'll make kind of a slippery substance. It's actually making a soap, and it brings that grease into suspension, encapsulates it, and then you're able to wipe it off. Now, you can get the grease off. The problem is the staining. So that's a tougher one. I've not had a lot of luck getting very ashy, tar-filled stains out of there, because what happens normally on a grill is, you know, you'll get a little bit of grease stain, but it's normally not a clear grease or a white grease. It's been seeping through the grill, and it's been collecting all that coal and ash through there and then depositing there. So honestly, scrub like hell with TSP. Use a little bit of oxalic acid, which I'll show you there in a little bit, to try to brighten the wood. But honestly, I've not had a really good experience with it. Almost every one of my customers, Dustin, I do the treatment, I get it pretty good. There's some gray or some black ghosting of the stains, and then they go buy a $10 grill mat and put it over that part, and it's fine. So, okay, so I'm going to go through some of this stuff here. Okay, there's basically 4 main parts to how I think about decks. There is managing the clients, there's cleaning the decks, doing something with the existing coatings. Tyler, how's it going? Thank you for watching. Prepping the deck, and then staining the deck. Wes Malgren, I think you're supposed to be on your honeymoon, so you better not show your wife that you're watching this. I think he's actually on a plane to Jamaica there. So, okay. Janice Filipowitz, I'll get to your question in just a second here. So we have managing the clients, we have cleaning the deck, we have prepping the deck, and then finally the application. Almost all problems that I'd experienced with decks was mainly a people problem. So when I started managing how I talk to my clients differently, the decks, all of a sudden, you never get a call back. It was basically I was over-promising in decks, and I was having good luck with my own deck at home here, which we're sitting on today. It's all a people management process. So I actually printed out something for you. Everybody in Minnesota builds a cedar deck, and they want it like this. Now this is a little bit orangish than most people want. Most people want just natural cedar. They want whatever this is to stay that way the longest. Now that is the most maintenance intensive process you can do. I actually printed out a TDS from Cabot, Australian timber oil, and this is one of the kind of go-to if somebody wants a clear or a cedar or a natural deck. I printed out the technical data sheet because I was experiencing some good luck with my deck, but I'm insane about keeping it clean and maintaining it. And what happens is the clients, they're getting misrepresented information from all these companies where they see a product on TV that says, hey, we're a 7-year finish. So they expect that they're going to put all this hard work in and that 7 years from now that deck is going to look perfect. The case in Minnesota is not that. And if they read the technical data sheets, and I actually print these out and hand them to my customers, because I never, for those of you who have been watching this long enough, you understand that I never want to sell anything. I never want to sound like a salesman. I never want to be a grease ball and kind of push things on people. So when I tell my clients, listen, if you want a cedar deck like mine right here, if you want a cedar deck like that, and you want it in its natural state for as long as possible, every year you're going to have to get out there and do something. And then it sounds like I'm starting to sell them on something, and I don't want to do that. So I print out the technical data sheets here, and I show them that for this Cabot, I'll read this to you here, UV light, sunlight, and moisture are wood's natural enemies, so minimize exposure. So that's a big indication there. Evaluate finish each spring and maintain as needed. Finish durability depends upon weather, wear, and other local conditions, but finish typically lasts 1 to 3 years on decks and 2 to 4 years on siding and fence. And when they say 1 to 3 and 2 to 4, I would definitely say 1 year, and I would definitely say 2 years on that stuff. So, Paul, sorry about that. I'm doing a live show right here. It'll be about 45 minutes, so okay. Sorry.
You know what? I'll stop back at the oven if that's okay.
You got it, sir. Talk to you then.
Thank you.
So, when they say this is best case scenario. If somebody could do a cedar deck on the south side of a house in Minnesota, 1 coat of a translucent oil and have it look perfect after 3 years, that's a very outlierish sort of deck. You must have a lot of trees shading it. So I actually show this to the clients, and then I don't come off as a salesman. And I also have my own deck, which a lot of people I invite to in New Prague here. This is a cedar deck I built myself with the help of a carpenter friend, and basically this has been my test patch for almost 10 years now, doing various things to this. Now, I have used every product, every form except for a solid stain on here. I've used every prep process, every chemical, gone through the whole works. So this thing has been my proving ground over the years, and what you're looking at here is the product of last year. Actually, in the first couple of years of my deck, I stained it twice a year. I wanted to see what the max amount of stuff I could do to it, and I wanted that sort of varnished look to it. And companies do not recommend that, but I like that look. I think it wears a little better too. You just have to keep it up. So I did my deck twice a year for the first couple years, and then every year I maintained it. Last year I perfected my stripping process, and I made it very, very efficient, and I stripped the entire deck. And what you're looking at here is the process of 2 coats of an oil stain on there. So previously it had about 12 coats of oil stain on it. I used one of these chemicals here on the table to strip it, and then we basically started back over again. And it was very easy to achieve, you know, that kind of varnished wood floor look after a little while. So, and this is indicative of what most people want in Minnesota, so when I experiment, I do that. So, okay, the first of the 4 steps, managing your people. Just be honest with them. Just tell them you're going to have to do something every year. When people kind of balk at that, which they probably should, it's a lot of work. The big restoration, most people leave their deck go gray, and then they call me. So it's a lot of work first. You got to pressure wash it. Sometimes you have to strip off the old stuff. You have to brighten it. You have to sand it. You have to clean it, prep it all, and then stain it. And then that's sort of all the hard work. It is so much easier to stain a deck after it's been properly stained once. It takes about half the time with me and the guys. So I tell people, at a minimum, get out there and do the handrails, tops of the handrails, and the deck floor. A lot of times the spindles can do that 1 to 3 years. You don't need to coat them every year. But the tops of the handrails and the floor, at least here in Minnesota, that's what gets it. That's where the water sits on, and that's where the UV rays hits it. So, okay, if we've properly managed our clients, now we have to figure out cleaning. There's a whole bunch of steps, and there's a whole bunch of science to it, but basically I've broken down the entire process for my company in a decision tree. So basically, this will be laminated, and this is given to my crews so that when they go to do a deck, there's a simple process of Do we need to strip? You know, it's a series of questions that guides them down the path, and it gives them formulas and things like that. So the biggest question in deck finishing is, you know, do we have to do something to the existing finish? If we do, can we leave a lot of it? Is a lot of it intact, or is it a completely failed deck? And that sort of guides your process here. Now, stripping decks, getting rid of all the old finish is a very tricky thing. It's a very easy process if you've done it a whole bunch, and it's oil-based. Water-based stains are very difficult to strip. Most available sort of, you know, sodium hydroxide strippers don't do a lot to that stuff. So you're going to have to use something a little more caustic or mechanical removal, and it's a very, very difficult, time-consuming process. So not all deck stripping is created equal. You have to make sure that it's an oil-based finish on there. Very easy to get off. Water-based, much more difficult there. So basically on the decision tree, we figure out, do we have to do something with the existing finish? Do we have to strip it? If the answer is yes, I actually have the chemical that I use. I describe what it looks like. I give the amounts to mix per gallon. I tell them how to apply it. I tell them, you know, not only what piece of machinery to use to put it on, how to apply it, how to work with it, how to remove it with the pressure washer there, and then you know, giving them some little reminders. You wash the pre-wet the landscaping, the plants, wash the plants after, and then after that we go to the step neutralize with a brightener. So now, if we do 30 or 40 decks a year, only about 2 or 3 are going to have to be completely stripped. So don't think that I go there on every deck and take it all off. A lot of times I get decks in 2 conditions. Almost all the finishes already come off, and in that case you just use a chemical brightener, which I'll get into in a second. Or all the spindles and the rails are pretty good, but the floor and the handrails are bad. And in that case, you know, if the stain is properly adhered to the spindles and the posts and things, you don't have to fully remove it. As long as it doesn't, as long as the next finish will bond with it, and as long as you won't run into any color issues with coverage with it, you can leave those coatings in place. So on a cedar deck like mine, I do not strip all the finish off every year. I remove the finish that's gone bad or gone brittle or been damaged by the UV, and then I apply more finish over everything, and it just builds its natural coats, and it wears and it builds like that. So if we've stripped all the finish off, it says neutralize. So then we have our neutralizer here, our oxalic acid stripper. I've used everything off the shelf. I still use it once in a while. They're sort of pastes and liquids, very thick viscous liquids. I've basically gone to semi-raw chemicals. I do get them from a company. They do amend them with some other things. It's sort of a homeowner and pro sort of combined there. You can source raw materials. It's very tough though. You have to get them in the right concentrates. You have to find a place to have them, things like that. So on a gray deck, we brighten it, and I use oxalic acid. This stuff's got a couple other things in it, but basically it comes in, I'll show you here, comes in a white powder like this, and you basically just follow the instructions to mix it, and you'll want to use different concentrations for different decks. If you're applying it by hand with a brush, you may want to mix it a little bit looser, not as thick. If you're using any sort of pumps and things like that to apply it, you can mix it a little bit hotter, a little bit heavier, a little more concentrated mixture. And oxalic acid is a really awesome thing. It reacts with the tannin in wood, and I'll move to the decision tree out of here. Okay, so the brightener, it reacts with the tannic acid in the wood and actually chemically changes it back. It loosens a lot of that dead gray wood fiber, kind of does double duty like that. I'm going to actually do a demonstration for you here in a second. So we will, I have a piece of finished decking right here for you. And this sodium hydroxide, this is a very basic sort of chemical. This is actually something used, sodium hydroxide, in different formulations, is used in the food industry. You know, think of the lye on the pretzels or the alkali in pretzels. Lutefisk, if anybody's familiar with the Minnesota food lutefisk, we take fish and we sort of immerse it in lye to preserve it, and then we eat it, which is a little bit insane. Chemical peelings of fruits, it's also used in that. And it also is basically lye, and it strips off oil-based finishes. So we have oil-based finish over this piece of cedar right here. I have the recommended dosage mixed up in just some plain water here, and I'll apply a little bit to this, and I'll kind of show you guys how it dissolves here. It only takes a couple minutes, so the trick with dealing with sodium hydroxide is to spray it on and make sure it stays wet. If it dries out, it loses its effectiveness. So you really want to get it on there thick, and you want to keep it wet. And we'll check on that in a couple minutes, see how that's working. Also, this probably looks familiar to people here. This is a weathered old fence board here. I have oxalic acid mixed up in water, and I'll kind of do a little demonstration here for you. All right, so we'll wet this a little bit, and I will apply in a small spot here. All right, you can already see that without even washing, without even scrubbing, this stuff already starts changing the color here. So let's see if we can give it a quick. Yeah. So this is a fun one. Oxalic acid. When you do a deck, a lot of the times when I get an old gray deck like this, we'll begin with pump sprayers and things like that, and we'll put this on, and before your eyes, in a few minutes, you can see the whole thing start changing in front of your face there. So it's a very fun thing, and homeowners like to see that too. And this is something that you know, there's a lot of difficult chemicals to work with decks, things like that. This is something very accessible to the homeowner. If you go buy, you know, I got an Ace Hardware here, you know, a couple blocks from my house. If you go buy wood bleach or oxalic acid in a white powdery form, you could just mix it up and spray it on like this. Just make sure you wash it all off. But this is a very, very easy thing that homeowners and pros and everybody can do. Sidings on houses, deck, things like that. All right, and it looks like our sodium hydroxide is working here. And Shane, I'll get to your questions there in a second. I know you're the expert at all this stuff. You just have to hold tight. Let me get through a little bit of this. So you can see finish comes right off there. All right, so there you are. Right back down to bare wood again like that. So the trick is, especially on days like this in the spring, it's a little bit breezy, it's a little bit dry, and you're gonna have to make sure that that stuff stays wet. If it dries out, you basically start over again, re-wetting it like that. So, okay, as we proceed, so we went through our decision tree. If you have to strip the finish, strip the finish. Because of the very basic nature of the chemical, you have to use a brightener, you know, like the oxalic acid here, to neutralize it. You know, if your pH scale, if you do something very basic, you have to do something very acidic to neutralize them out, and then you have to make sure you wash it all off. And that's always the last step of my decision tree. I'll show that again here. So the last thing is, a lot of the times, you know, we have to decide. We do a combination of these. We either strip, we brighten, and we rinse, or we brighten and we rinse, or we just rinse. If there's no finish on the deck, a lot of times you don't even need to brighten it. If it's just an old gray weathered deck, we always try to do it with water first. We never use chemicals if we don't have to. If we think that the chemicals will aid in the loosening of the dead wood fibers and brightening it quickly, then we will use a little. But a lot of times, honestly, we just use the correct pressure washer with the correct pressure in the tips, and a lot of times decks just clean that way. So, all right. And also, something I'll show you guys here is, you know, as a lot of us pros talk about processes for our business, we have command books that each one of my crew leaders has, and we have laminated sheets that goes through every one of our processes, and it lists out step by step how to do it. So for painting the walls in a room, painting a ceiling in a room, restoring a wood front door, painting the outside of a house, finishing a piece of, or excuse me, a newly constructed home, this is mine for decks, and this is the step-by-step process that my people use. And it's basically a linear decision tree where we go down the steps, and the things that don't apply you skip over, and then we then we just go to the next one, and this is basically what I want my people to do from the second they step on a job to the second they leave there. So, and Andrew, I'll get to your question here in just a second. Okay, we've gone through technical data sheets. All right. Like I mentioned in the start of the show, there is an alternative to a lot of these chemicals. If this is a little daunting, a little overwhelming, what you can do is take a gallon of water, a cup of bleach, and 4 ounces of liquid TSP. I find that dissolves better than the granules. And you can scrub a deck like that. And I did that for a lot of years as a basic house and deck wash. And that does aid a little bit in the brightening of wood as well with that little bit of bleach. Certainly oxalic acid does a much better job with that though. So, okay. As far as pressure washing, I'm going to show you a few of my things over here. So we have 3 pressure washers in the company here, and I will take this guy off for this one. So this happens to be our little fella. This is just a Mighty M. It's a 2.4 gallon per minute, 3,200 PSI. We usually wash in teams, so we'll have, we call this one Little Boy. You can see the piece of tape there. We got Big Boy, that's out on a job site right now, washing a farm building. And we'll work in teams, and these are very light, especially with the aluminum body. I think the biggest one we have is 75 pounds, and that's about as heavy as one person can sort of hoist in and out of the back of the truck. I know everybody has trailer mounted units, big gas powered units, much bigger than this, but honestly I've been able to wash industrial buildings, you know, farm buildings, houses, everything I need to with this. And then our next one is a 4,000 PSI unit, just the next size up there. So spray wand, high pressure hose. One of the biggest tips I can give you about this, and one of the things that is very frustrating, is having improperly sized tips for this. Now, believe it or not, all of these things, these tips, are sized for the gallon per minute and the pressure of the washers here. Most of these smaller tips you can get by with, maybe not specializing and sizing correctly, but when you get into turbo nozzles or wobble tips or high velocity tips like this, you can run into some problems. So when I wash houses, when I wash decks, I basically use a yellow tip for rinsing or washing very delicate material, or I use what we call up here wobble tips or turbo nozzles. This is basically one of those red tips that you're never supposed to use, but it's rotating at a high velocity inside here, so when the pressure hits it, it rotates so fast you almost can't see it, and it just makes a big noise like that. These you have to be careful with. They used in the proper hands, these things are absolute magic. They'll remove paint without harming the wood. They'll remove a lot of wood coatings without harming the wood. They certainly wouldn't do anything to this deck. This one's got a good intact, you know, super thick coating on it, but if you have a brittle coating on, a lot of times this will almost shave it off, and if you are skilled enough, it won't make the wood too furry. But make sure there's always little, see if I can show you here. Is that it? No. There we go, yep. So you can see some engravings on here. These things, you have to make sure they are sized properly for these. You may think, well, I'm just going to get the biggest one I possibly can, but it won't rotate at the right speed, and you start writing your name in the side of a house. So when you get, always know the PSI, the gallons per minute on these pumps, and you can order these from companies specially sized for them. And we have a whole series of these. This one happens to have an inline filter here. We do a lot of washing out in the country where we use well water, and it's very rusty. So always make sure you have these kind of mesh filters attached. There's a lot of them that just have the quick connects attached right to there. When we apply chemicals, a lot of the times we'll use garden sprayers like this. I've attempted downstreaming, what's called downstreaming. So downstreaming is when you inject a chemical into the sprayer wand of the actual pressure washer, but you don't let it go through the pump. So the water comes through here, out here, then it picks up the chemical, then it goes through the hose there. You don't want a bunch of these chemicals running through your pumps. That'll kill the seals. So this picks up the chemical after that when it has pressurized water and shoots it down through the wand and out towards the house. And because the water is the vehicle siphoning it out of the bucket and onto the house, it gets diluted very heavily. So I've experimented with doing super concentrated formulas and things like that, it's just too diluted in the end. So what I will use is a bunch of garden sprayers like this, where we'll dilute it to the proper mixture here, and we'll apply it by hand. And again, I like to work in teams, or even 3 or 4, where we have a couple guys applying chemicals, sometimes 3 guys doing a chemical and 1 guy washing, just to make sure everything stays wet. And obviously, it goes without saying that we fully safety up when we do a lot of this stuff. Oxalic acid, you know, it's obviously a harmful chemical. It's not as harmful as sodium hydroxide. With sodium hydroxide, you want to go, excuse me, get this out of here. All right, so with sodium hydroxide, you really want to go full safety. When we pressure wash, we normally wear sort of one of these pseudo waterproof sort of painter's overalls, coveralls. We have rubber boots on, we have thick rubber gloves, even when we mix the chemicals, things like that. So when you're doing the stripping part, full safety up, we want the respirators, we want everything else on. If you're just washing the deck, it's mainly just eye protection and ear protection. So we have the kind of noise canceling headphones there, and a lot of times it's not even the gas pressure washer, it's actually those turbo nozzles. They make so much noise themselves, and then when it contacts the siding or the deck, it makes a very, very loud noise, and it's a repetitive noise, it's a high-pitched noise. So you want to have eye protection and ear protection with that stuff as well. And I've had a lot of luck with pressure washers. I know a lot of people carry around some monster pressure washers. Honestly, whatever's just above what homeowners have, whatever you can get at the home store is usually pretty good. You go a step or 2 above that and into the pro machines, but the very low end of pro machines, and those do great. I mean, again, I've done industrial metal buildings, I've done farm buildings, decks, delicate stuff, concrete, everything, and I've never felt like it was just underwhelming. So let's see what we have here. Oh yes, and also just the basic rinse. And it's something that I always harp on my guys